So I want to talk about the state of play on Capitol Hill involving, in particular, passenger rail. But I want you to think of passenger rail this morning as more than a way to connect points A and B. It's about what passenger rail can do as an important component in building the sense of place where that train stops, and your ability to take advantage of that, and in fact, that you must take advantage of it in today's economy. Transportation for America is a work of Smart Growth America. At the federal, state, and local level, at the local level, we have the Form-Based Code Institute and the Complete Streets for All. At the state level, we work with the Governor's Institute, but we also work with state DOTs who are willing to look at different ways of connecting people beyond the automobile, and then locus or real estate developers who specifically work in downtowns and in revitalization of cities large and small. All of those things come together for one simple vision, and that is, whoever you are and wherever you live, you deserve to live in a place that's resilient, prosperous, and healthy. We do our work through three principal ways. One is technical assistance. We do this with cities and towns all across the country. I've had the great pleasure to work in 147 different cities in the past almost 15 years in every state in the country. And as much as I would like to believe that we teach while we're there, just recently a week in Alaska, it's what we learn that's important. And what we learn across visiting communities spread across our nation informs the advocacy we do. Because let me assure you that it is those local voices that can change votes on Capitol Hill. And that's demonstrated certainly within transportation every time there's an authorization bill or appropriations that come forward. So we take that advocacy that we build from what we learn around the nation, and that translates to language that we will discuss with members of Congress and work to implement. IIJA, the passenger rail title within IIJA, is principally work that we and others did with Senator Roger Wicker, Senator from Mississippi, as chair and ranking member of Commerce, and with Chairman DeFazio on T&I. If you look at their two separate bills, they're almost identical, and they were easy to conference into one bill that will power the growth of this country. So how are we connected? Well, Eisenhower started us on the Interstate Highway Program. And of course, one thing about Americans, once you get us headed in the right direction about building, we can build. And this should look familiar to you. It's the high five, built to move people by automobile. And sometimes I think we are so focused on moving the vehicle, we forget who we're really connecting. So are we designing for automobiles and trucks, or is it people that we should be designing for? Because you see, people have different needs. Some of us in this room are baby boomers and we're aging. We still want to travel about this nation. We still want to visit our families, but how we get there is a choice we'll make, and we're making different choices than previous senior populations made. Also, there are citizens of ours who are not as blessed in their mobility as we are, and how they are able to move from one job to the next, health care, education, visit families, should be a critical decision that we make when we employ transportation. And then, of course, children are usually totally forgotten as a part of the transportation infrastructure of the country because we spend too much time talking about asphalt, concrete, and steel rail, and not enough talking about the human beings that actually have to use it and depend on it. I listened somewhat bemused yesterday to the panel, a very good panel, discussing where is my rail car? the comment was made that the customer is king, and that's certainly the way my father trained me in our family drugstore. The customer, the patient in our case, was king. Well, the conversation among those on the dais centered on moving commodities. The shipper should be king in moving commodities. Well, you know, passengers on a train are customers too. And I don't know that there's anyone in the room that would say that passengers on a train, when viewed through the eyes of certainly freight railroads, over which most of our passenger rail operates, certainly you wouldn't describe how we're treated as kings, those on passenger rail. And when it comes to where is my rail car, if you're a passenger standing on a platform in your hometown waiting for your train, which is coming probably on a freight rail track, the question is not where is my rail car, the question is where is the whole damn train? Until we can solve some of those issues, we aren't going to see passenger rail evolve and develop as we see throughout the rest of the developed world. But I think there is a slight and slow change within the freight rail industry as they consider passenger rail. Why? Because of the Jobs Act. I'm going to share with you the numbers, but there is a ton of money for the development of rail in this country. And it has been called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It should be the first in a lifetime opportunity in developing rail. But these funds, as robust as they are, you cannot expect them to last without considerable effort on the part of everyone in this room. I just left Capitol Hill, spent a week there with the Southern Rail Commission that I'll reference later, and every single office, Republican or Democrat, said these funds are coming to an end. So I want you to sense that it is time for action and time for implementation. But let's look at what is available. As you look at these pie charts, that big light green area is part of the Jobs Act that's purely for transportation. And as you look at the smaller pie chart, certainly highways take the lion's share, and that's the darker blue. The light blue is rail, and that's $102 billion. And when we compare IIJA to the FAST Act, and you see IIJA in red and the FAST Act in blue, it is rail infrastructure that enjoys the largest percentage increase over previous investments in infrastructure. And when you look at that which is available for passenger rail, certainly the larger portion, almost $44 billion, is available, not guaranteed, available to Amtrak. But as you look at that lighter blue portion, that's the Fed-State Partnership for the Implementation of Passenger Rail, and that is what may actually build out the expansion of the Crescent from Meridian, Mississippi to Dallas-Fort Worth. And the darker blue is the CRISI, Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Grant. And then there's a tiny sliver that's the Restoration and Enhancement Grant. That's where you get your operating funds. But look at all of that money that's available for passenger rail if we but act on it. Now, you'll hear from Amit Bose, a Federal Railroad Administrator, just a little later today, and I genuinely believe that Amit senses that he has an opportunity to be a change agent for the development of rail within this country. Keep in mind that, and I see Alan Rutter here in the audience, former Federal Railroad Administrator, and we discussed FRA has moved from principally a safety organization to now one of the largest grant-making entities in the federal government. They're understaffed to do that, but they are trying to get the money out the door as fast as they can. Our job is what we do with it and how fast that we can implement it. Beyond just implementing rail to get you from A to B is the whole economic development paradigm that has developed. You see, your hometown, large or small, is in a ferocious competition over the creation of a sense of place. Why? Because the two giant generations in this country, us baby boomers, who were once the largest generation in the country, and the millennials, who are now the largest generation in the history of the country, are making different choices about how we get around. As I said, seniors don't want to fight the interstate highway for the rest of their lives, the number of days we have left, and the truth of it is those younger than I out there, you don't want us on the interstate highway for the next 20 years anyway. But the millennial population is a different youthful population. We had the Chevrolet, and the Chevy is how we picked up our friends. You know, without seat belts, you could load 8 people in the car. Well, the millennials have this. This is their Chevy. They pick up 1,000 friends in a clique, and they have demonstrated they want to live in places that have a downtown that pops, whether it's large or small, and that they have a way out of that town center to other places such as Shreveport to Dallas-Fort Worth. And every city along the route that we have discussed sees this as a huge economic development opportunity for them, passenger rail. But it's more than just what is coming through DOT and those things that are specifically targeted to passenger rail. And I want you to think of these issues, because if I were to give you a train tonight, how am I integrated into the rest of your community in the morning when I step off the train? So you have the complete street set aside. That's how you can employ bike lanes, wider sidewalks, place for transit, place for the automobile as well, all working together and deal with your accessibility issues too. Transportation Alternatives Program, that's how we built the station I'll reference a little later. Protect Program, how you protect infrastructure from natural disasters. I can tell you all about natural disasters in the South. Katrina hit, as you know, which it didn't hit New Orleans. New Orleans was a levee failure. It put its eyes on Mississippi and destroyed 60 miles of the Mississippi coast for 2 miles inland. What broke the back of Katrina coming in, 35-foot wall of water coming in? The CSX right-of-way. That elevated right-of-way for CSX broke the force of that storm. And the Protect Program has developed more of that. RAISE grant, Louisiana, Baton Rouge and Gonzales, Louisiana, have $20 million to build their stations along that line. You can utilize that program. Safe Streets and Roads for All and Reconnecting Communities program, both robustly funded. The money is there, but you've got to have the plans and the will and the commitment and the partnerships to move forward. So what have other places done around the issue of passenger rail? So it's more than theory. It's being witnessed in the built environment. Little Kirkwood, Missouri. Kirkwood, Missouri is not a staff station, hasn't been a staffed station under Amtrak, yet Kirkwood redeveloped the station. They have a volunteer program that serves as a station agent, boarding help. They decided that that station in the downtown identified their hometown and their downtown and was worth making a place of activity and excitement within the community, and they did that out of their own will and desire. Denver, Colorado. The first time I visited Denver, Colorado, it was to talk to the city council and others there. They wanted to demolish Union Station in downtown Denver. They may forget that they ever wanted to do that, but they did. They wanted to build something brand new there as a multimodal center. Well, thank goodness they were persuaded not to do that, and better vision took place in Denver. And if you've been to Denver's Union Station, it has transformed that whole part of Denver and the region because they did it right. And you look at Normal, Illinois, outside of Burlington, there was a Normal college built there. That's where you train teachers, is what a normal school is. There wasn't a city there, but wherever in Burlington wanted to see the college out and remote because, you know, it's full of college students and you know what they do. So what happened, though, was where you have that college and youth, there's going to be development. Well, Mayor Chris Coos, who's now been appointed to the Amtrak Board of Directors, and I've known Chris for decades, didn't have a downtown, didn't have a city hall, certainly didn't have a real train station. This is what he's developed. They're now having trains at 110 miles an hour through this part of Illinois, and it has totally revived the economy of this once small town, now growing by leaps and bounds in a very sustainable way. You'll hear from the Southern Rail Commission. Knox Ross is here as chair, and we provide policy advice to the Southern Rail Commission. And when you talk about an entity that has decided they've planned, now they want to implement. So Katrina hit, destroyed all the infrastructure, highway, rail alike, along the Gulf, but all of the infrastructure was rebuilt in 3 months. So don't tell me we can't lay infrastructure if we want it badly enough and we can do it quickly enough. And that included the rail. And they, not just rail, but rail bridges as well in 3 months, because that was the desire to do so. But no passenger rail was restarted. And of course, it had the poor service of the Sunset Limited 3 days a week, often in the middle of the night. And of course, if it arrived the same day it was supposed to, that was considered on time. The Southern Rail Commission has worked for 17 years now, and it's going to be 2 round trips a day from about 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, serving New Orleans and Mobile. And that service is supposed to start October of this year. Now, remember where we started. CSX Railroad told us, we will need $2.4 billion, that's with a B, $billion in infrastructure improvements to do this line. My friends, we went to Mars for $2.3 billion. I'm just trying to get to Mobile. Well, the Chrissy grant, which was awarded $178 million, impacts Norfolk Southern, CSX infrastructure, the Port of Mobile's infrastructure, and been a change in leadership at CSX, but now CSX is a strong proponent of this passenger rail, and they're working very hard to see that they are a cooperative partner in implementing. And the federal funds available are changing, I think, the mindset slowly. You've even got UP saying they might entertain operating a passenger service. So these things are beginning to change. Look at, if you see the dotted line from Meridian all the way across to Dallas-Fort Worth, that's an effort that has been awarded a CIDP, Corridor Identification and Development Program grant. We've been working with your advocates here. I see the Andersons right down front here in Texas, as well as those in Mississippi and Louisiana. You've got the strong support of very conservative. Now, Mississippi is a conservative state, believe me. You've got the strong support, though, of Senators Wicker and Hyde-Smith in Mississippi, Senator Cassidy in Louisiana, and Congressman Moran in Texas. You've got strength there to implement this project, and the Southern Rail Commission has a CIDP grant to get that started. But I want to also focus on the New Orleans to Mobile route. That's one that's getting ready to happen. And how did we go from a desire to implementation? Well, you need to show a return on investment. Conservative governor, conservative members of Congress, fiscally responsible public servants. So to prove our case of return on investment, we went to the Trent Lott National Center. Now, no one can accuse them of being a liberal think tank. This former Senator Trent Lott from Mississippi, former majority leader of the Senate at the University of Southern Mississippi, and they issued this report on economic impact for Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And I encourage you here in this conservative state make it about return on investment and make it legitimate. And let's look just at Mississippi and what that return was. Just for construction costs over potentially a 4-year stretch, Mississippi needed to put $14 million on the table in the Crissy and also commit for operating support of a reasonable amount moving forward for that service. For that $14 million, just in construction costs, Mississippi looks to get $34 million back. That's a pretty good return on investment. But let's look beyond that at the tourism impact, because keep in mind you have New Orleans, one of the highest visited tourist destinations in this country. You have Mobile on the other end. Both have cruise terminals at their ports. Both have historic downtowns. And then in between you have the Mississippi Gulf Coast with casinos spread all across the Gulf. And the casinos depend on moving people in and out to lose money along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And New Orleans gets 800,000 foreign tourists every year. Next year, most will be Chinese. They're not renting cars and driving across the Gulf. But they all come from places that have trains. And they'll get on that train. And when you look at tourism, with a 1% increase in tourism, and that's just going to happen almost unaided, it's almost $25 million a year, every year to Mississippi. So you've offset your infrastructure costs immediately. But with a 5% or a 10% increase, and if you can't increase your tourism growth with the proper marketing over a properly run and managed passenger rail service focusing on the food and beverage of the South, if you can't leverage an increase of 5 or 10%, you're in the wrong business. Get out of tourism. But look at the impact that it will have. These numbers can turn very conservative minds about the value of passenger rail. They'll do it on highways. If you want an interchange on a highway, what's the first thing they'll say to you? Think of all of the investment and economic impact that interchange will bring. Well, your city is an interchange on a highway of steel. So I want to end with a place I know intimately, in my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. I was mayor there 16 years. It's a strong mayor form of government. Meridian is a small city of about 43,000 on the Mississippi-Alabama border. We may be small, but we are the economic, tourism, education, entertainment, healthcare trade draw for about 450,000 people in the counties that surround us in Mississippi and Alabama. When we look at infrastructure, Meridian is blessed with infrastructure. Yes, we have 2 interstate highways that split in Meridian, connecting you from Atlanta to Dallas or Atlanta to New Orleans. We also have robust air service for a size city that we are, and until recently, everything that moved through the air out of Meridian moved first to Atlanta Hartsfield. I told my children not to worry about me, that if I'm in Meridian, when my spirit leaves my body, it will go first to Atlanta Hartsfield. Then it'll be reassigned to one of 2 permanent destinations. But we also are serviced by the Amtrak Crescent, which I like to believe originates in Meridian and heads north to New York, and originates in Meridian and heads south to New Orleans. But those assets are only valuable to us depending on how we leverage them. And as I talk to communities across the country, you have to have a vision of where you're going, but it has to start with who were you in the past? What were the assets that caused your community to build there rather than 10 or 20 miles somewhere else? In our case, it was 2 railroads crossed there in 1850. And we grew to a railhead in 1860. And we know what happened later in that episode of our history, and I'll touch on it in a minute. But then you need to ask yourself, who are you now? And that's got to be an unvarnished look at who you've become, good and bad. And the most important question you have to answer, though, is who do you aspire to be? And I want to keep that in your mind when you're talking about developing, especially passenger rail through Texas. Who is it that you aspire to be? So for Meridian, Sherman burned every structure in Meridian to the ground. And he heated the rails and tied them around trees, forming Sherman's bow ties. He cabled Lincoln and the War Department. Meridian no longer exists. But 28 days after the general left, the people had rebuilt that rail because it would be their way out of that period of their life. And German Jewish immigrants moved to Meridian after the Civil War, and they built this infrastructure that you see here in this picture. They brought a European sense of art and architecture, and we were the largest city in the state at one time. And this is what Meridian looked like when I was a boy. You can see my city hall there towards upper center of that picture, robust downtown economically, and the Marx and Rothenberg brothers built this facility. They had a retail store in Meridian and one in New York City, and they were connected by that passenger rail, and they built also a Grand Opera House because you could pick up a night's entertainment in Meridian when you travel from Atlanta to New Orleans, because all the performers travel by private rail car. So all the Barrymores played Meridian, Sarah Bernhardt played Meridian, all of the great talents of the day. And this was Meridian's Union Station. 26 passenger trains a day at one time through Meridian. Very much connected and very much a choice of movement, but this is who we were when I took office. That's what's left of that grand passenger rail station. It's basically the baggage wing. And when you look at that, does it tell you Meridian has any idea of where it's going? It doesn't even have an idea of where it's been. That Marx Rothenberg building that was once a vibrant retail center was covered in this awful skin and subsequently closed. The Opera House was gutted and was a pigeon roost when I came into office, and the business community came to me and said, "Mayor, tear that down. We need more surface parking." Now, they also said my notion over a passenger rail station was going to be a glorified bus barn. No one would ever use it, nothing would ever become of it, and aspirationally, Meridian needed to regain a sense of itself and its place in the history of our part of the region. So we designed, we're playing back to our strengths. It was rail, it was transportation. This was designed on the South's first multi-modal transportation center. And yes, it has a beacon out of the top of it, like an airport has a beacon to bring people in off of that interstate highway system. And this is the facility we built. Meridian had $1.3 million in what was a little over an $8 million facility, and that was 30-some-odd years ago, where $8 million could build something mighty nice. We built it with transportation. It was called enhancement programs at the time. Mississippi DOT had these funds, and no one was applying for them, and they sure didn't want to send them back to the federal government, so I decided we could alleviate their problem. And we applied for funding, and we were able to build this facility. And it has leveraged $197 million in the surrounding area. So for every dollar the city put in that facility, we've leveraged almost $197 in return. Now that's a return on investment you can sell. And the structures in the downtown that it has also led to new life. And that empty department store is now a conference center for Mississippi State University, because Meridian's easier to get to than Starkville is. And I'm an Ole Miss grad, so to say anything nice about Mississippi State is really stressing me. But they're an important player in my downtown, and that Opera House has been totally restored. 30 original finishes replicated there. You can see what a splendid facility it is. And the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. became so intrigued by this small southern city concentrating on their downtown and their connection to the region that they now send performances from the Kennedy Center to perform in Meridian. And we've had the Soweto Gospel Choir. We had Itzhak Perlman in the Kennedy Center Orchestra, and Wynton Marsalis played once and is asked to come back twice more because of the intimacy of the theater. This changes your community, and like many of you in smaller Texas cities, our people may not travel a whole lot, and this brings the rest of the world into them. And the Mississippi Art and Entertainment Experience is built and located right next to our station. Why? Because we believe we can show you that Mississippi produces more artistic genius per capita than any state in the Union, because we've always been a small state. Look at your 20th century American lit is almost exclusively Mississippi authors. Father of country music, father of rock and roll. We're storytellers, and we think that's important for the nation to know, the world to know, but especially important for the children of Mississippi to understand. And it's right next door to Union Station. And what it's done in the downtown, condominiums there for selling for $500,000 a piece, unfinished space. And now in the downtown, we have art galleries, and we have places where you can spend the evening. Downtown is full of young people and a few of us boomers alike in a vibrant downtown. And the coup de grace was to take this 15-story Art Deco building that, again, the effort was to demolish that. My successor came into office and asked Archives and History in Jackson, how can I get this building off the National Trust list so I can tear it down? And Archives called me, and Dick Moe, who was president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, was a good friend. And the next day, this was one of the top 10 endangered historic structures in the country. So it wasn't demolished, but it has recently, it is now a Marriott Signature Hotel. And those of you who came to the RPA conference, National Convention in Meridian this past fall, stayed there, and you can testify to the splendid facility it is. All of these things take not a 2-year, 4-year term in office, not even 16 years. It takes a vision that connects you into a future, and we have talked about what it takes to move forward. And yes, plans are critical, important, but it is time to implement. You got to have a shared, clear vision, and it's got to speak to the heart as well as to the mind. You've got to have your stakeholders lined up. You've got to identify the federal and state programs where they're available and look outside of just transportation funds. And you've got to develop the matching funds, which I understand here can be a challenge in ways that it was not in Mississippi. But these are the things you have to do, and we don't have time for plans to sit on shelves anymore. You've got to implement. And you know, when we talk about high-speed rail, you got to have rail first. Most of the people in this country have no experience with passenger rail. You've got to have some rail to begin with. And I think you can certainly do that. The I-20 corridor is one we're very excited about. But you've got to have the staying power to make this happen. And, you know, the transportation system as it exists today will probably serve me for the rest of my life, which I'm counting. I like to think I'm middle-aged, which will mean I'll live to be 150. But the transportation system will work for the number of years that I probably have left. But it's not going to work for my grandchildren. It's not going to work for the connectivity they need, desire, and must have to have a profitable life. So when I need reassurance that what we're about is a long-term goal that is worth fighting for, I find that reassurance in the eyes of my 4 grandsons. You see, the decisions we make today in the built environment, today we're talking about rail, will allow them to either have a productive future in their hometown and home state or not. And there's one thing young people will do: they will move. Now, we're storytellers, and my grandsons want to hear the stories my grandmother told me about the wild man of Lost Gap, for one. You can look him up, true story. They'll also want to hear stories about what it was like when I was a boy, and they will laugh at the notion of a phone with a cord on it. But they'll be envious of being able to walk down to the corner drugstore and get a malted milkshake at your father's drugstore. And one night before they drifted off to sleep, the youngest one looked up at me, and they call me Paca, P-A-C-A-H, which is better than Peepaw or any of the other names you could get saddled with. But looked up at me and said, "Paca, what's it going to be like when I get big?" See, that's the question we have to answer. And that's what our work answers for them. What will his life be in how he is connected to family, education, health care, opportunity? What will his life be like when he's my age? That's a reason to remain invested. That's a reason to work 17, 18 years on restoring Gulf on the service, and an equal amount of time on restoring service across to Dallas-Fort Worth. So I urge you to make a commitment to the longevity of your dream and now start executing. Thank you. I'll be glad to take any questions if you have time. If not, I'll head to the...
We're going to shuffle you off to the chat room, John Robert, if that's okay. That'll be down the hall over here.
On this side?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Okay. Any questions you have, please see Mayor John Robert Smith. Thank you so much. Very invigorating and well appreciated. Thank you, sir.